And Eduardo messaged me. He should either be here or he's joining imminently, Suba.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Brenton. Ray, I'll go ahead and start sharing my screen anyway. Just put the leader slide up. Ray, can you give me a thumbs up if you can see it?
I can.
Awesome. Oh, thank you. Many thumbs ups. Love it. Thank you. Awesome. We have about close to 40 people. I think we should get started. Yeah. Great.
Let's roll.
Awesome. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Product Leader series. My name is Shubha Shetty, and I will be your MC today, along with Ray Zellman, that you can also see in your window. I have a 20-year career management in companies like eBay, Walmart, Upwork, and Fanatics. And I honestly feel the most transformative time in product is now because of AI, but also paradoxically because of the greater need for human direction. We concert with Ha Win, who we all know and love, and the Product Leaders Summit. The Product Leaders Summit is an annual fall gathering of product leaders that is held in the Bay Area. For more information on the Product Leaders Summit, please visit its website. So to take this forward, our Product Leader Virtual Speaker Series is simple and twofold. The first is we want to foster you, the next generation of product leader speakers, by giving you a platform to be able to hone your content and craft. And the second is we want to facilitate deeper connections and learning amongst all of us product leaders, because there is so much to learn from each one of us, formally and informally. So to support this mission, we have an agenda, which will start off with introductions, and after which Brenton Sellati will talk about the foundations for exponential growth. Brenton is a product leader from who led product teams at Wayfair and has seen exponential growth at Wayfair. And we are so grateful that Brenton has agreed to kick off this series with us. Thank you again, Brenton, and we can't wait to dive in and learn from you. After that, we'll have Q&A with Brenton, followed by an NPS feedback. We take, in this part of the series, feedback very seriously, so please do offer it when you're asked. And after that, we'll have some breakout rooms for small group connections and networking so you can get to know each other a little better. And our goal is to close on time so we can give you a breath before your next engagement. So having said that, let's now get a deeper window into Brenton and what makes him a special product leader. And who better to introduce Brenton than Eduardo, his prior boss at Wayfair. Eduardo, you there?
Yes, I'm here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming, and please take it away.
Perfect. I will do a brief introduction of myself, and then we'll introduce Brenton. So about myself, as you said, my name is Eduardo. I worked at Wayfair for 6 years, where I manage Brenton. I work now in data company learning platform, specializing in teaching data and AI skills. About Brenton, we met in 2018, and we worked at I moved to Boston in 2019, and then is when we start working much closer. And Brenton really excel at his work, and his scope through the years in Wayfair really grew because of a bunch of reasons, some of them that Brenton will go through them today. Maybe some strengths on Brenton. So I think number one is it's really around be able to take complex topics and really distill and communicate them to large and distinct audience. Another one is ability to coach his team and get more and more leverage of his team. I think that is really, really important. And third, but not least important, is just be able to deliver tremendous business value. Apart from all the good work I had with Brenton, there's also like, it's a lot of fun working with Brenton. Brenton has great humor. And I have a small story to tell. One of the two Wayfair founders, one of them was more on the business side, the CEO, and the other one was on the tech side, coding. So you could still find a lot of code from Steve. Brenton led a project to basically get rid of some system that Steve has built on the first year of Wayfair and was really holding us back. And took a long time to get that done. And Brenton threw a party with the team when that was done, and come up with a design for a T-shirt saying, "Bye-bye this system. Thanks, Steve." I found like the T-shirt and the design hilarious. Steve discovered about it and even ordered one T-shirt for himself, which I found he had like really great humor. So I think that is really good. So so I will now pass to Brenton.
All right, thank you, Eduardo. I really appreciate it. And so good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Let me just get my screen share up here. All right, am I good? Quick thumbs up. Awesome. I'm really, really excited genuinely to talk to you all about today about the foundations for exponential growth. And you might wonder, what are we referring to? What's going to grow exponentially? It is literally the most important product, which is ourselves. That's what we're going to talk about finding exponential growth for. Like good product people, we'll start off by establishing the problem. And that is product management as a profession has this sort of built-in pattern where you have to consistently solve novel, unique, ambiguous problems. And you have to think for yourself to do that. No one can give you the answer. And you also have to influence others to adopt your way of thinking. And you have to be consistently right to build credibility, to drive outcomes as you're doing that. This is super hard. And it's really hard because, well, obviously, no one can tell you how to think for yourself. If someone could tell you how to think for yourself, that would defeat the purpose. I think we all kind of know that intuitively. But here's the next level, which is trickier. No one can teach you how to think for yourself either. And the reason no one can teach you how to think for yourself is because you're unique. And so I can teach someone how I think for myself, but they have to find a way of developing that ability within themselves to solve problems. And so really only you can teach yourself how to think for yourself. And so what I'm going to be doing in this presentation is giving you the mental models and the tools that I think will help you do that, and is how I taught myself this skill. Also, like good product people, we're going to start off with why this problem is big enough to matter. And it's commonly said as a quick sidebar that product people should fall in love with problems. The problem is most important. And that's somewhat true, but I think the most important question to ask is actually, why is this problem big enough to matter? We're drowning in problems and sort of spreading ourselves too thin, trying to solve too many problems is one of the fundamental failure patterns that we can fall into as product managers. So let's talk about, why is this problem big enough to matter? Product management is going through something of an identity crisis right now. I agree with Shuba. It's a very exciting time to be a PM, but it's also a challenging one because there's headlines everywhere about the death of product management and major CEOs of big companies like Airbnb and now more that are creating the one roadmap and driving every decision and getting deep into the details. So what's the value of product management? I think a lot of this existential angst that we've developed as a profession is because we've become a bit commoditized in terms of what we do and how we do it in ways that run counter to the original purpose of why product was created, which is creative problem solving and cross-domain collaboration. And so we collectively, as a product management community, starting with the folks in this room, but certainly in a much broader tent, have an opportunity to reestablish that identity for what is product management and what is its value within the tech ecosystem. And I think that starts with raising the bar for how we consistently bring creativity, critical thinking, and strong communication to the work that we do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's work backwards. So talking about what you should walk away from this presentation with. One, you should understand the foundations of intelligence and the special nature of a particular domain of intelligence, which is experiential intelligence, and its infinite trainability. Second, you should have an understanding of the foundations of creative critical thinking in terms of first principles and mental models. Third, you should understand the foundations of framing and the importance it plays in communication of your creative critical thinking to your desired audience. You will also understand how you can compound your experiential intelligence and how that can lead to exponential improvement in your critical thinking and framing ability. So the more you can grow your experiential intelligence, which is unbounded, the better you will get at critical thinking and framing. And those are the raw ingredients for you to solve complex, ambiguous problems with unique thought leadership. And then lastly, you should have a set of world-class resources that will help you begin, or because you're here, you're probably already interested in growing yourself. So it'll help you accelerate that exponential growth journey. I'm going to start with the TLDR. So this is the high-level way to think about the mental model for this entire presentation. Everything else will be a double click into this. The foundations for compounding your experiential intelligence are establishing first principles. Think of those as the Legos of the basic building blocks of logic. You then assemble those into mental models, which are a combination of not just first principles, but also other assumptions and logical scaffolding to create a cohesive picture. And then third is framing. It's being able to communicate that structure with clarity and narrative so your audience can internalize it and can operate on that same plane of understanding with you. If you do this, you will compound your ability to solve problems in a way that will become exponential. For folks that have heard of Atomic Habits, this is taken from that book. A 1% improvement compounded over 365 days will result in a 37x increase by the end of the year. So day in, day out, you will not notice or feel an observable difference with a 1% improvement, but over the course of a year, if you get 1% better every day, you're going to be 37 times better at the end of the year. And do that for year in, year out, and you can see how this exponential growth effect, this compound growth effect, can take hold. So that's what we're aiming for here. So with that, let's now double click into everything that I just talked about, which is starting with the foundations of intelligence. A little side story. When I was early on in my career, I was really in awe of all the incredible, smart, talented managers that I had around me. And I wondered, can I ever reach their level? Am I smart enough? Like, am I just not born with the level of horsepower that they have, or is intelligence trainable? Eduardo was one of those managers that definitely made me question, am I as smart as that, and can I reach that level one day? And so I did a bunch of reading, and I developed this theory, or this mental model for intelligence, which is one, you have sort of these different domains to intelligence. The first one is your neural domain. That's your short-term pattern recognition, mental math, neuroplasticity type intelligence. The second is your emotional intelligence. This is your ability to objectively observe and reflect upon your own emotions, to see and anticipate the emotions in others. You then have your reflective intelligence. This is your prefrontal cortex. It's the logical part of your brain. This is where chess players and engineers and folks that are really able to hold lots of different levels of abstraction in their head simultaneously, this is their strength. If you process the phrase thinking about thinking about thinking, that's using your reflective intelligence muscle. And then finally, you have experiential intelligence. Experiential intelligence is your natural tendency to derive generalized learnings from the things that you're exposed to that you can then apply to other novel situations which are not identical, but have similarities to what you experienced before. So those are the 4 domains of intelligence. All of those domains are trainable to an extent, but experiential intelligence has the special property of having infinite trainability. So no matter how much I practice chess, I'm never going to be a chess grandmaster. I'm never going to be world-class at chess. So I can train it, and I can use my reflective intelligence muscles to get better at it. But for the most part, there's going to be a limit to how far we can go. But experiential intelligence is unbounded. It's the only one that has that property. And this explains why, as people get more experience, they tend to get to higher levels of management. They have better decision making. They can handle more scope and complexity. There's a natural experiential intelligence growth effect that we all go through. And so finding ways you can kind of hack that and accelerate it is really powerful. So the key to that exponential growth is compounding your experiential intelligence over time. You can do that because your experiential intelligence will grow naturally, like I mentioned, as a function of what you're exposed to and what you derive from that exposure, how much you retain, how much you absorb. Therefore, if you want to accelerate that growth, you can absorb more from what you're exposed to, be more observant, be more of a sponge, internalize more. You can also absorb what I call synthetic experience from thought leaders, people that have a proven track record of success and who can articulate their thinking in very clear first principles and mental models so that you can then not just understand what they did, you can understand how they thought about that in ways that you can then incorporate for yourself. And this is really the way to supercharge that growth of your experiential intelligence, and which I think has made a huge difference for me. So when we talk about first principles, mental models, these things you should absorb, let's double click and talk about what those are in more detail. You have all probably heard the term first principle before, but just to make sure we all have a common understanding, a first principle is essentially a logical primitive. It is a foundational proposition that stands alone, and it can't be deduced from any other proposition or assumption. Sometimes called reasoning from first principles, the idea is to decompose complex problems into their more basic elements, and then using those basic elements, those primitives. And if folks haven't already, check out the AWS or the Amazon 2023 shareholder letter, where Andy Jassy spends a lot of real estate talking about the value of primitives and how you can use them to build up these interconnected dynamic positions on a given subject. That's the power of primitives. They can be daisy chained together in novel ways that create new value that independently they can't achieve, but together they can be extremely powerful. First principles thinking is the way that you can reverse engineer complicated problems and unleash creativity. Throughout this presentation, probably 80% of what I'm sharing with you was not something that I independently thought about or came up with myself, but I made the connections between things. And if you want to be creative and you want to be innovative, by definition, you can't follow the leader. So instead of having to come up with every brilliant idea that you possibly could, you can take a lot of other people's great ideas, and then it's much easier to connect the dots between them. And first principles allow you to do that. Establishing first principles is deep, hard, high horsepower thinking. It's been around for a long time. Socratic questioning is a great way for you to probe and to unearth your own first principles or the first principles of others. I'm not going to go into these in detail, but challenging yourself. What are you thinking? Why do you think that? What are your assumptions? What if you believe the opposite? Looking for evidence, looking for lack of evidence, so on and so forth. I'm not going to belabor all these. There is a bit of a shortcut way. If you don't want to go through Socratic questioning systematically, you can just ask yourself the 5 whys. So the 5 whys, if you're not familiar, is asking yourself why recursively 5 times until you can't ask why anymore. Usually before 5, you'll start to tap out, but pulling back those layers of why will help you get down to that logical primitive in a different fashion. Let's talk about how we're actually using first principles for this session right now. Let's do a quick application. So if there are 4 dimensions of intelligence, neural, emotional, reflective, and experiential, and all people possess innate ability across those 4, and all are trainable to some extent, but most have a finite level, because knowledge and experience are infinite, experiential intelligence is therefore infinitely trainable. Because it is infinitely trainable and all their domains are limited, it is the only reliable domain to increase your overall intelligence over time. All the others at some point will have a cap. Because experiential intelligence compounds, the more you have, the better you can absorb future information because you can make more connections between past experiences. Compounding systems that have sustained additions over time will have exponential growth. This is why we all invest in retirement early and often, right? And the earlier and more often you add to a compounding system, the sooner the exponential growth effect will take off. If you were to take one slide from this whole presentation, this is This is the thesis for why this is valuable. And we're applying the principles we're talking about in real time to the subject matter. Okay, mental models. That's the second pillar. So mental models is about creating a logical reasoning framework based on your first principles, but adding in assumptions and logic. Think of them as being logical scaffolding. They theorize the model of a system and help you see the big picture so you can reason about its purpose and structure and how to influence it. Mental models are theories, they're not facts. They integrate assumptions and heuristics. And on balance, the more that you're deriving a mental model from strong first principles and only adding in assumptions and heuristics where absolutely necessary, the stronger and the more accurate that mental model will be. But there's always going to be a lot of art to the science here. But just know that mental models are not entirely composed of first principles. You do have to layer in your own assumptions and intuitions. The value of mental models is they allow you to see a big picture, and that big picture allows you to then decompose problems into smaller parts. And the important thing is not that you are correct. All mental models, by definition, are a reduction of reality. They are simplifications of reality. So don't worry about being 100% correct. Worry about being useful in practice. And if it's useful in practice, then you're going to get utility and value from it. Mental models have almost infinite sizes and shapes. There are some that are more abstract. So folks have probably heard of things like the one-way versus two-way door analogy. This was made famous by Jeff Bezos at Amazon. Easily reversible decisions are two-way doors. One-way doors are decisions that are really hard to revert from, so you move forward with caution. So some will be more abstract. And then some will be more applied, almost like frameworks, things like the 7 Powers framework by Hamilton Helmer, or one of my favorites that's for another presentation, but the Cynefin framework, which talks about deciding when to focus on learning and gathering information to make good forecasts, or if you have enough data to make a forecast and to place a bet on an outcome. So there's an infinite number of mental models. They'll take different shapes and sizes, but universally, great PMs have to create effective mental models that are unique to whatever situation they're facing. All frameworks are mental models, and so there's a general tendency for PMs to absorb frameworks and then to apply them to situations where they're not suited or they're not adapted. And there's a lot of this kind of framework roulette, product by numbers thing, which happens where people take frameworks like rice or whatever it may be, and they just apply it without thinking about why should this work and where would the limitations potentially be. The best performing PMs create custom mental models, and a lot of times it's just adapting existing mental models to that situation in ways that are consistently effective at helping them reason about identifying, validating, and solving problems. The more high quality mental models you're exposed to, the better you'll get at seeing those primitives. The better you will also get at spotting weak mental models where they don't have strong underlying logical support for what they're recommending. There's a great repository of mental models from Farnham Street. So I'll share this as a follow-up resource, but you can start with 100 mental models there, go through as much as you want. Like I said, there's infinite ones, but not all of them are of great quality. These will all be very solid mental models that can start to help you build that initial bank for yourself if you don't already have a lot of these. And now onto framing, the third pillar. So framing is about communicating that mental model and those principles with an anchoring perspective that enables your audience to internalize it for themselves. Framing is, in essence, teaching. The goal of teaching and the goal of framing is for your audience to understand that perspective for themselves, and then either to use that perspective to align with your thinking and conclusions, or to identify where they have specific points of debate or disagreement or confusion and to clarify those. In my experience, about 80% of misalignment is rooted in people who collectively want to do the best thing and sort of support the overall good, but they have different perspectives about what that is. So framing facilitates this internalization of a common mental model, and that mental model then becomes the way that we debate facts, assumptions, and logic from a common reference point to then reach a durable consensus. As a quick aside, in the 20% case where this doesn't work, it's often not because you can't agree on a common framing. It's because one of the parties is disincentivized by the outcome of that framing. It means that their part of the company or their part of the product is less important, or it should be automated or should be reduced. So that's where things get political. But I find in general, people have a common understanding of something and a common way of evaluating the algorithm for what matters most. You can usually get to a point where you can have a solid agreement and consensus. And if not, you have principled disagreement, not one that feels like someone has to, sort of sacrifice their position without understanding why the other argument has validity. So all this, like I said, yields more productive debate, better decisions, and much stronger alignment. Quick aside, framing is on the same level as first principles and mental models, because to have strong first principles and mental models is like building a great product, but then not having good framing is like having no rollout plan or no go-to-market plan. It's output without impact. So framing is one of, if not the most critical points, because without framing, you can't actually get the value from all that great, unique, novel thinking that you did. Just as a quick example to give you a break from all the text, here's an illustration of 3 people that are all thinking of different mental models. The person in the middle talks about it for a while, and then he asks his other 2 peers, "Do you know what I'm talking about?" And they're like, "Yeah, totally. I got it. That's good." Well, they're not, because they're all actually thinking of different things. And so framing is about being able to get everyone to be thinking of a square or a cube or whatever that is, and then to use that as the point of reference for whatever topic they're discussing. So this is where a lot of framing is also putting things into writing, putting things into structure, so people can really internalize that shape of how you're evaluating the problem. You can build good framing using the RCC framework. So the first element of this is the R is make it relevant. If I were to ask you, what did you have for breakfast 35 days ago? You probably couldn't tell me. And that's because it's not relevant. You didn't retain that information. But if I asked you, what's your birthday? What's your mother's birthday? Where'd you park your car? What are the name of your pets? You'd remember those things because they're relevant to you. So always start off with, how do I make this relevant to my audience? Who are they? What do they care about? What do I want them to understand? And what do I want my calls to action to be? What I want them to do. Next, make it compelling. Establish the situation, establish context. Create a narrative for your mental model. Start with the whole and then decompose it into its parts. Use clear chains of logic to connect ideas. Don't have breaks where you move from one topic to another without a cohesive transition point. Where you can, recognize that brains think in images, and so try to leverage images as props to really reinforce key concepts. And then finally, make it crisp. Simple, short sentences, no complex sentence structure, limited adjectives, talking in the active tense. So the girl hit the ball is active tense. It's subject, object, verb. That's much more effective and easier for brains to retain than passive tense. The ball was hit by the girl. Again, great resource here. The day you became a better writer, it takes 3 seconds or 30 seconds to read this, but a lifetime to master it. This entire presentation is me applying these RCC principles to this subject matter for you. So when you go back and you review this later, if you look at all the things I'm recommending here, I'm literally applying them and have applied them up until this point in all this content. Always be framing. Framing takes a lifetime to master. You can practice it constantly. Observe how top thought leaders frame their messaging. Remember, good framing is teaching. If you're struggling to frame something, it could be a communication issue, but it also might mean that you have to yourself better understand that subject matter. And then be wary of the dark side of framing, which is narrative bias. This is the tendency for us to believe a narrative that fits past events, but actually doesn't explain why it happened. And this can be true both for ourselves and how we develop our mental models and sort of explain our theories for things. It's also very true of how others will, explain how they won the winning lottery ticket, and how you can too if you just, eat the things for breakfast and, do a dance and put some salt over your shoulder the way that they did the morning that their winning lottery ticket hit. So just be careful of that, both for yourself and for others. But don't wait to only do framing for big product decks or big product artifacts. You can be framing all the time in emails and Slack messages. It's a constant thing. And the more that you're aware of it and the more that you're actively thinking about it, the better you'll get. And Suba, I think I'm almost done here. So I think we're pretty good on time. So synthetic experience and exponential growth. This is the last section we're going to talk about. So there's this concept of moving to edge city that I'm going to share more with you on. And this is really the key to supercharging that growth of your experiential intelligence. This is where you can go beyond the limitations of what you can be directly exposed to and what you can absorb. Edge city, the concept of edge city, is a community of people that are operating at the frontier of some domain of craft and pushing the boundaries forward. If you go to Reddit, there are little communities of edge city all over the place. People that are, in love with pimping out their cars and doing all kinds of hydraulic stuff. People that love art. People that love, French bulldogs. Like all of those can be examples of edge city. Those places are where you will find world-class synthetic experience from top practitioners. And so what I have done in my professional experience is I've been seeking out edge city for technology, business, and product management. And I'll talk about where I've found that. But ultimately, finding those really high quality resources, and we've never had more high quality information density and sort of synthetic experience density than we ever have before. There's so much amazing content out there. And so this is really just the beginning of the journey. Learning is an infinite process. And so from here, you now have these tools and you can start to chart your own course. With some closing thoughts, I will say, find what you're interested in, find what gives you joy, and then pace yourself. So start with things that are interesting and really resonate with you. Those will be the things that you're going to retain and be intrinsically motivated to absorb and not make yourself do homework and eat your veggies. Make time for that to become part of your standard operating rhythm. We all have routines that make up our days and weeks and months. And so find ways you can incorporate this continuous learning into those rhythms of life that you have. I would recommend somewhere between 1 to 5 hours of content weekly. I'm probably in the 1 to 2 hour range weekly. And know that you can't binge this stuff. You can't listen to 30 hours of content in a week and to, get a month's worth of learning. You're going to take some time to absorb it. So give yourself that time and pace yourself. Before the survey, I just want to acknowledge I had to cut this section due to time, but I do have an appendix, which is some of the synthetic experience resources that I've curated as those that I've found most valuable over the past 10 years. So it's a list of thought leaders and some of their top articles about their career backgrounds. There's about 7 or 8 folks here. I will share this as a follow-up. Also, there's some amazing podcasts out there. Hopefully folks here know about Lenny's podcast. That's very product and tech specific. There's some others that have world-class thinkers that I think have overlapping relevance. So I will share all of this with you guys. And this will be a great place. Hopefully you know some of these people, but I doubt you know all of them. So you should find something new and interesting to kind of scratch that itch if you feel energized and motivated to continue your learning after this presentation. There's a 1-minute survey that Shubha mentioned earlier. It's literally just an NPS question and then 2 open ends that are optional. So please right now, pull out your phone, take the survey. This is the first in the speaker series. It's really important that, as product folks, we get feedback loops from our users. You are the users. Please tell us what you thought of this and what you liked and what we can improve, because we'll absolutely be incorporating that into future sessions. So with that, I think I am just about on time. So I'll turn it back over to you, Shubha, and Ray to guide anything we have and the questions.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Brenton. I felt like I learned so much in the last 20 to 30 minutes. So really appreciate sharing your wisdom. Let's just give maybe another 15-20 seconds for people to complete the NPS survey. And then I have a few questions that were sent directly to me. But please, all of you, post your questions online so we can, continue the wisdom from Brenton. And Brenton, how would you like this content to be shared with the audience? Do you prefer this to be shared as part of a follow-up email to the audience, I presume?
Yeah, I think we'll do a follow-up email. I'm not sure if I'm going to share the entire content verbatim, but I'll certainly share all of the, essentially, all of the presentation notes. So I'll share that appendix, all the thought leaders. I'll also share some of the other one-off documents and artifacts that I referred to throughout the presentation. So at a minimum, you'll get that. And then if you really want the entire presentation, I don't know if I'm ready to let it go fully out in the world yet, but if you have a strong desire for it, reach out to me on LinkedIn or on Slack or something, and let me know that there's demand, and I'll take that into account.
That's awesome, Brenton. I think you had a bunch of great resources. So thank you again for agreeing to share that with this group. And so is the best way to reach you through your LinkedIn or through the Product Leaders Slack channel? Is that the best way to reach you?
Yeah, I'd say LinkedIn is the best way for me. I know that the Product Leaders Slack channel is pretty large, but I don't know how many people in here are already part of that community. So I would say start with start with LinkedIn. And then also, as a quick plug, if you're interested, I am part of a product leader community called Supra. And we just launched a podcast interview with me talking about completely separate content related to some of my experiences and mental models growing from a leader of 5 teams when I joined Wayfair to 50 teams when I left Wayfair. I took over Eduardo's job when he left, and I took over a scope double that size about a year later when a peer left. So I learned a ton about Eduardo that you'll actually hear about in that podcast. But if you'd like to hear more from me asynchronously, check that out. It's called a Masterclass in Scaling as a Product Leader on the Supra Insiders podcast.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that, Brenton. So I have a quick couple of questions for you.
Please.
The first is the way you talked about experiential learning being more elastic and how that can actually grow with time and with investment was really interesting. What in your experience has been something that you have invested time in your own product craft? How have you seen it grow and how have you seen the impact?
Well, so I will regularly be reading books, listening to podcasts, and I'm always trying to find what are those golden nuggets that I can take and internalize for myself that can become these really powerful kernels. And I'll give you an example. So maybe here's 2 examples. One's like a small kernel, the other is like an entire mental model. When I attended the Product Leaders Summit last year, and Gib Biddle did his live talk during the summit, one of the prompts he had was, we should always ask ourselves as product folks, what is the problem? Is it big enough to matter? And what does success look like? And he didn't emphasize that second question, but I would have been struggling with some of the things happening at my company at Wayfair around lack of prioritization, being spread too thin. I think a lot of folks can empathize with feeling like you're in that situation. And for some reason, that is the problem big enough to matter bullet just resonated so deeply with me, as that is actually the fundamental problem that we don't address. And is the problem big enough to matter is actually the most important question to ask ourselves. And so how can I then start to focus my energy on how I would evaluate the answer to that question? A way in which you can do that, one of the ways that I have found most insightful and actionable is Hamilton Hellman's 7 powers framework. So this gets into what is strategy. Like, that's again a very amorphous term. Everything is strategic all the time. The word loses its meaning. And as a contrast, a book that people commonly say is very helpful for building a strategic thinking muscle is Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. I found that book to be insightful, but not actionable. It really doesn't tell you what good strategy looks like or how to create good strategy. It's a little bit academic. Hamilton Hellman's 7 powers, by contrast, is a very insightful and actionable framework on how to effectively evaluate a mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive set of factors that enable businesses to have differential competitive moats over time and to sort of widen their leads. And so if you can then take that and start to apply it, it will help you answer the question of what is big enough to matter, because if it's not building or widening one of your competitive moats, why else would it matter? How else could it possibly be one of the most important things? So that's an example of how these dots will help you start to connect, and you'll be able to make novel connections from things that you didn't independently come up with yourself. I think you're muted.
That's awesome. Yes. Well, if we had $1 for every time we spoke when we were muted, right, we would all be millionaires.
Very rich.
Very rich. That was super helpful. So quick rapid fire 3 questions to you, Brenton.
Cool.
What is your #1 tip to align difficult stakeholders?
to listen to them and ask them lots of questions. Generally, people will agree if they have a common frame of reference for facts and logic and assumptions. And so getting to a place of common understanding either requires you to frame your perspective to another person and to get them to adopt it, or for you to understand their frame of reference and then to engage on that framing. And so if you have a difficult stakeholder and you're trying to get them to understand you, change the approach, really try to understand them and get inside their head and then debate or add on to their frame of reference. And that will make them feel heard and respected and valued. And like, then you start to, connect the dots as they see them.
Super helpful. What is your number one self-care or personal routine tip that has helped you in your product management leadership career?
I talk about this in the Supra podcast, but it is having a very intentional system for how I think about managing my time. For folks that follow Shreyas Doshi, he has done a public time management seminar. And one of the things he says that really resonates is there will come a time in your career when you can no longer scale yourself by either putting in more hours or increasing the efficiency with which you do your tasks. You will just be permanently oversubscribed beyond what you can possibly physically do without exhausting yourself. And so when that time happens, the only way that you can actually feel like you have sustainable work-life balance and you're productive and you're high performance and all those things is having a way of thinking about how do I invest my time as a limited resource into the highest leverage activities. And so that like allows you to, no matter how chaotic things are, how large your scope is, it allows you to have intention about where you spend your time so that you feel like you have a plan and you're on offense and you're not just riding the chaos wave constantly.
Awesome. Thank you so much. With that, we come to the close of the talk and the feedback and the Q&A session. Thank you all so much for participating. But hang on there, because Ray is going to put us in small group, in breakout rooms where we will get to have a chance to meet each other more intimately. And please turn on your video for a more authentic experience. Again, I cannot thank Brenton enough for his bravery and leadership to kick off this series. Thank you so much, Brenton. Really learned a lot from your speech and want to obviously stay in touch and follow you for more. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Thank you.